How the canal drinks, freshwater locks with a thirst. To understand why the bill keeps growing, we need to see how the canal drinks. The Panama Canal isn't a sea-level trench, it's a staircase of freshwater. Ships don't sail across, they're lifted. Gravity does the lifting, and every lift is paid for in lake water that never comes back. Start with the anatomy. On the Atlantic side, the old Panamax flight steps ships up toward Lake Gatún. On the Pacific, Miraflores and Pedro Miguel step them down. The expanded Neo-Panamax lane runs parallel bigger chambers with water-saving basins that recycle part of each fill. In both systems, the principle is the same. You open culverts, let water rush in from a reservoir, equalize levels, move the ship, then drain to the next chamber or eventually the sea. No pumps. No external energy, just head pressure and careful timing. Lake Gatún is the heart, an artificial inland sea created by damming the Chagas River more than a century ago. It's supposed to hover near target elevation for safe operations. In dry years, it sags. In wet years, it recovers. Ulhajuela upstream adds storage. But these are rain-fed bowls and they're shared. Panama City and Colón drink from the same lakes that lift container ships. Hydropower pulls from them too. When one user takes more, the margin for the others shrinks. Now the thirst. Each Panamax chamber needs on the order of tens of millions of gallons to fill. A complete lift and descent adds up to dozens of millions per ship. Even with cross-filling maneuvers that shuffle water between the twin lanes to save a few lockages, worth every day. The Neo-Panamax locks are larger. Their water-saving basins capture and reuse a big slice per cycle, but the math still lands higher per vessel because the chambers hold more. Under heavy Neo-Panamax traffic, total daily consumption jumps even if the number of transits looks stable. Here's where design meets today's climate. In the old operating rhythm, long rainy seasons refilled the lakes reliably, covering the withdrawals and then some. El Niño years always pinched, but the next wet season made up ground. Lately, the pattern has shifted. The rainy season starts late, ends early, and repeats weaker more often. Heat raises evaporation off the lake surface. The recharge window narrows while the faucet and the straw both widen. More urban taps, bigger ships, steady demand. Operationally, the canal team squeezes every drop. Cross-filling at the Panamax locks moves water sideways instead of dumping it out. Simultaneous lockages push two ships through one chamber when beam allows. Sequencing is optimized so gravity falls are used efficiently, and Neo-Panamax direction is timed to conserve more in the basins. In really tight weeks, they throttle transits at peak evaporation hours and hold draft tight to keep lake levels stable. These are smart, hard-won tricks, and they buy time. They don't mint new water. Meanwhile, the gauges tell the story. In the worst months of 2023-24, Lake Gatún sat at or near record lows. Draft reductions followed, then daily transits came down. The drop wasn't just the absence of rain, it was the exposure of a system that must spend water to work. And because the same system must also supply cities, the canal authorities face a blunt hierarchy. Drinking water first, navigation second. When forecasts show El Niño intensifying, uncertainty migrates from meteorology to finance. There's a quiet irony. The expansion's water-saving basins were a leap forward, but the very success of enabling bigger ships made each mistake in timing more expensive. In wet stretches, Neo-Panamax throughput felt like a triumph, more cargo per crossing, fewer ships per ton, less congestion. In dry stretches, the same scheduling shifted the draw toward larger, lumpier gulps. Efficiency at the ship level can still be fragility at the watershed level. Zoom in for a human moment. A hydrologist at the canal checks the morning radar loop, the 24-hour inflow estimates, the evaporation model. Her board shows the booked queue, the distribution of Panamax versus Neo-Panamax, and the potable demand from the city grid. She adjusts the day's slot mix, shaving a few Neo-Panamax transits to protect tomorrow's lake elevation target by a fraction of a foot. That fraction is the difference between keeping draft steady for 7 days or cutting it by 2 inches this weekend. 2 inches translates into containers left on the dock or grain left in the silo. Her cursor hovers, she clicks. Meanwhile, something else is happening upstream. Deforestation and land use changes alter runoff timing. Harder, shorter storms can dump water that runs off quickly instead of soaking and feeding the lakes evenly. It looks dramatic on a satellite image and underwhelming in a reservoir a week later. Storm intensity doesn't equal reliable recharge. Timing and distribution matter as much as totals. This is the moment everything changed for how the canal thinks about water. The realization that design can't outrun hydrology. You can lengthen vessels within the lock's envelope. You can fine-tune auctions and slots, but the system's currency is freshwater, and the exchange rate with the atmosphere is getting worse. That's not a forecast, it's what the meters already show. They built a marvel. They also built a dependency. Before climate norms shifted, that dependency felt safe. Now, every ship's lift has a shadow cost the basin can't always afford. 2016 expansion, bigger ships, smaller safety margin. 3 years before the drought alarms, the ribbon was cut and the horns blared. The third set of locks opened, and the first Neo-Panamax container ship slid into a chamber that felt like the future. Wider gates, deeper sill, a promise baked into every speech, more cargo per vessel, fewer ships for the same tonnage, better economics for everyone. For a while, it looked true. To understand why that victory hid a risk, we need to stand on a catwalk above Agua Clara and watch one full cycle. The new locks use water-saving basins, 3 per chamber, stepped like terraces. When a ship rises, water cascades down from the lake, but before you drain it to sea, you shuffle much of it sideways into those basins. Then you pull the saved water back up for the next ship. It's elegant. It's real conservation. And yet, the volumes involved are still enormous, because the chamber itself is enormous. From the boardroom, the math looked ironclad. A single Neo-Panamax crossing could replace multiple smaller ships. The canal could double effective capacity without doubling transits. Toll revenue would rise with vessel size, while the total number of lockages held steady. In wet years, that logic produced record guidance, more slots, higher allowable drafts, celebratory notices about 50 feet through the new lane. Shippers built schedules around that reliability. Ports on the east and Gulf coasts expanded to catch the flow. But there was one problem the spreadsheets couldn't smooth. Hydrology doesn't scale like steel. The basins recycle a lot of water, but not all. Each bigger lift still draws more fresh water than an old Panamax lift. At low lake levels, the conservation gain gets eroded by operational realities, traffic mix, beam clearances, directionality, and the need to keep both lanes moving. When demand peaks, the savings get consumed by throughput. The margin that used to hide in wet seasons shrinks. What nobody knew at the time was how forgiving the weather window had been. Early expansion years coincided with decent rains. The lake recovered, drafts stayed generous, planners believed the new equilibrium was stable. Carriers ordered bigger ships tailored to Panama's new envelope. Port cranes got taller. Importers shifted contracts east to capture the cost break. The system re-optimized itself around Neo-Panamax as the default. Meanwhile, auction mania began to flicker, then flare. The new lane added a premium product, guaranteed time on a bigger ship that unlocked retail calendars. Reservation prices crept up, then spiked during tight weeks. The authority layered in just-in-time services and differentiated booking periods. Revenue climbed, another apparent validation. But on the water, captains noticed a subtle change. Reliability bent first, then occasionally snapped. A week of missed rainfall, a maintenance outage, a heatwave pushing evaporation, and suddenly schedules slid. Here's where the expansion's strength became its vulnerability. Economies of scale masked fragility during wet years. Then the climate signal got louder. El Niño shortened rainy seasons, recharge came late and left early. Lake Gatun's level failed to rebound on schedule. Drafts ratcheted down, transits were capped, and the very ships that had made the business case began bumping into physical limits. If you designed your logistics around 50 feet and had to settle for 44, those extra rows vanished into air. Microstory captures the pivot. In 2019, a retailer's Asia, Savannah String celebrates its first run of Neo-Panamax vessels clearing at full draft. Transit times tighten predictably, inventory turns improve. In 2023, the same string hits repeated draft cuts. The line drops containers in Cartagena, books an emergency rail bridge from LA to Atlanta for overflow, and pays for a last-minute auction slot to rescue a Black Friday window. The CFO opens a new expense code called Panama Mitigation. It doesn't close again. Meanwhile, something else was happening inside the canal's control tower. Dispatchers learned to choreograph the lanes like a concerto, sequencing ship sizes, alternating directions to optimize basin reuse, and cross-filling the legacy locks to skim a few more virtual transits worth of water. Those maneuvers bought weeks, sometimes months. They couldn't restore the safety margin that the larger chambers had trimmed when the weather turned against them. Publicly, the message held, the expansion delivered as designed, and it did. Privately, carriers received advisories about draft caution and reservation scarcity during dry spells. Insurers watched an odd divergence, higher toll revenues alongside higher schedule variance. For a choke point, that's a reputational leak. Reliability is the product. The moment customers feel they must hedge around your calendar, the system starts routing itself away whenever it can. By 2024, a pattern was undeniable. When rains cooperated, the canal lifted restrictions, pushed drafts back up toward 50 feet, and transits climbed into the mid-30s per day. When rains faltered, the squeeze returned, auctions ballooned, daily transits dropped into the low 20s from a typical 36-38, and the corridor's economics rewired overnight. The expansion hadn't failed. It had succeeded into a world where the hydrologic budget no longer covered the peak draw. The lesson is blunt. Bigger ships make sense at sea, where scale squeezes cost per mile. Inside a freshwater staircase, scale also squeezes the margin between operations and the lake. The 2016 expansion gave the canal a new engine. In a warming climate with tighter recharge windows, that engine runs closer to redline. When the needle sticks there, prices move, routes bend, and the supposed one-off becomes the baseline everyone quietly plans around. Climate signal, rainfall variability, and El Niño whiplash. While dispatchers choreographed water like surgeons, the sky rewrote the script. Panama's rainy season used to arrive like a train, predictable, generous, long enough to refill Gatún and calm nerves. Lately, it shows up late, leaves early, and brings uneven bursts that look dramatic on radar but don't soak the watershed. What the meters see is a shrinking recharge window and a lake losing the quiet surplus that once cushioned mistakes. El Niño turns that squeeze into a vice. In El Niño years, like 1997-98, 2015-16, and 2023-24, the rainy season slips. The onset lags weeks, sometimes more. The first storms are shorter, the last ones fade early, and total precipitation slides. Meanwhile, longer, hotter dry months pump evaporation off lake surfaces. The result isn't just less water in, it's more water out at exactly the wrong time. Here's the operational pain point. Storm intensity isn't the same as usable inflow. A violent afternoon downpour hitting baked ground rushes straight into rivers and past spillways, a surge that doesn't linger in storage. For locks, timing matters as much as totals. Gentle, sustained rain that feeds soils and seeps into tributaries builds the reservoir. Flash storms flatter annual charts and leave hydrologists staring at stubborn lake lines. The statistical trail tells the story. In the past few years, draft reductions have appeared more often and stuck around longer. Advisories tighten the Neo-Panamax draft from the headline 50 feet toward the mid-40s multiple times, sometimes held for months. Daily transit ceilings walked down from the mid-30s to the low 20s during the 2023-24 dry stretch. Those aren't isolated blips. They're a pattern that logistics teams now pencil in when they build calendars. A few weeks earlier than anyone wanted, a mid-season gauge check on Gatún flashed a threshold. Recovery was stalling. Maintenance windows that seemed fine in April suddenly looked risky in June. Carriers got quiet emails, plan around limits, reconsider loads, book reservations earlier. Publicly, the language stayed careful: temporary measures, expected seasonality, continuous monitoring. On the water, captains were already phoning port agents to push berths. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the indexes. Climate researchers watched the Oceanic Niño Index climb and flagged knock-on risks for Central America. In the canal's AIS data, a strange ripple appeared. Time-sensitive ships accelerated pre-arrival speeds and locked bookings earlier, front-running the squeeze. Bulk carriers, more flexible and margins thinner, peeled away first. Containers held on longer, using contracts and priority tiers to keep moving. The composition of traffic shifted in a way only scarcity can choreograph. This was the moment everything changed. A wet season that didn't refill on schedule. Hydrologists had a calendar in their heads. By a given week, the lake should be here. It wasn't. Weeks later, it still was. The canal trimmed drafts again, then rationed transits, then opened the auction spigot wider. Insurers started adding corridor riders. Procurement teams wrote a new line into budgets labeled Panama Contingency, not for one quarter, but for the year. Zoom out and the physics look unforgiving. A freshwater staircase needs steady rain and mild heat. A warming world supplies more heat and more variability. Even if total annual rainfall doesn't fall off a cliff, the distribution matters. Later onsets, earlier endings, longer dry gaps, bigger bursts that run off too fast. That's El Niño whiplash layered on a climate baseline trending hotter. The canal's water budget used to be shaped by seasons. Now it's tugged by oscillations and spikes. Add the ocean's signal on top. By mid-century, scientific projections indicate a roughly 25% increase in extreme wave events in key corridors. That matters even when the locks have water. Higher seas and harsher storms mean more weather delays, more cautious drafts at sea, and fewer reliable crossing windows. When the ocean gets rougher at the same time the lakes get lower, the reliability envelope narrows from both sides. If this continues, the scenario is blunt. Seasonal draft limits become structural, mid-40s as a recurring ceiling, not an exception. Daily transit caps normalize in the low to mid-20s for weeks each dry season, with auctions as standard practice. Time-sensitive cargo buys certainty early. Bulk and lower margin trades detour by default. East-west flows rewire. More Asia, US cargo lands on the west coast and rides rail. Atlantic-bound bulkers round the Cape when margins allow. Suez carries a larger share only when security permits. Inventory strategies abandoned just in time except for the most predictable lanes. Buffers become permanent, tying up capital. Ports and rail nodes swing between bursts and lulls as Panama seasonality imprints on calendars. Onshore, the consequences multiply. When drafts drop suddenly, cargo gets reshuffled downrange. Partial offloads in Caribbean hubs, added handling longer dwell. When daily slots tighten, queues stretch, and the auction board lights up. When both happen together, carriers reprice routes. Some shift to rail bridges across North America, some swing south, burning fuel and calendar. All of it shows up sooner than people think in the price of a fridge or the gap on a shelf. Micro story: a meteorologist at a carrier in Singapore circles a date on her wall. ONI ticked positive 6 weeks back. Panama's rains are underperforming. Risk curves say queue lengths will jump. She flags the network team, accelerate bookings, pull forward eastbound sailings, trim ballast legs. When the canal publicly tightens a week later, her ships are already at anchor with reservations in hand. The board congratulates her. A smaller importer calls and can't even get an agent to pick up. Meanwhile, the canal's own messaging tried to keep confidence intact. Forecasts suggested relief in late April. If rains cooperated, restrictions would ease. They did briefly. Drafts crept upward, daily transits climbed toward normal, and the auction fever cooled. But that reprieve came with a caveat. Dry seasons would likely carry seasonal draft limits going forward. Reliability would be cyclical, not constant. Businesses should plan accordingly, because the market already has. Why this is a warning about the future of global trade. Choke points are shifting from fixed capacity constraints to climate-governed variability. A canal that once acted like a metronome now moves like a tide. As oceans grow rougher and watersheds grow tighter, baseline reliability becomes a product you have to buy, not a given you can assume. The Panama premium won't be the last. Suez, Malacca, even Arctic routes will inherit versions of the same physics. Plans that don't price climate variability will pay it at checkout. Get this, they priced scarcity before they admitted scarcity. The market felt the variability, hedged against it, and wrote it into rates, contracts, and inventory buffers. By the time a press line said manageable, the surcharge had already been added, the detour booked, the shelf price nudged. That's how climate signal becomes grocery bill, not with a crash, but with a steady ratchet that clicks every time the lake level lags behind the calendar.